Okay. Okay, I'll turn the meeting over to Stu Madison to introduce Rabbi J. TelRav.
Thanks, Joe. I want to welcome all of you. Welcome Rabbi J. TelRav to our meeting. He'll be talking today about what's going to happen after COVID. Things have been pretty tough during the COVID time, the pandemic, and afterwards, we're likely to see a different way of living. Some of the habits we've learned, I believe, have made changes to us that we might want to continue afterward. Anyway, he'll talk about all those kinds of things. But to give you an idea about his background, Rabbi J is the spiritual leader of Temple Sinai, has served the Stanford community for more than 8 years. Though raised in the Detroit area, he spent much of his adult life in Israel, New York, and Denver before joining the community with his wife, Julie, and his 2 kids, Amitai and Neely. Rabbi TelRav was ordained from the New York campus of the Hebrew Union College and is an alumnus of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. In addition to the standard rabbinical curriculum, his training specifically focused on chaplaincy, modern liturgical development, and Jewish contemplative practices. He has served as rabbi to the men's and women of the United States Navy and Marines, the Boy Scout community of Philmont Scout Ranch, and the individuals with developmental disability of the Detroit community. Joy, mindfulness, and holiness are all essential to Rabbi TelRav's personal expression of Judaism as he works to enhance the sacred community at Temple Sinai. I present Rabbi J. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Stu. Good morning, gentlemen. It is a real pleasure to be with you. And I gotta say, Joe, congratulations on just mentioning me when I first came in the room. It is very unusual that someone will put the emphasis on my last name in the correct spot, which is the second syllable. If you think about a lot of the words you know in Hebrew, a great majority of them have that emphasis on the second spot, like shalom. So my last name is pronounced TelRav, and very few people get that right. So congratulations. It's great to be here. I have heard so much about this this organization, and as I flip through the window of names here, and I see how many of you are familiar to me, it just makes me really happy to be able to speak with you this morning. In preparation for our time this morning, according to the way Stu described my my plan, I've polished up my crystal ball. I've got that set for our use today, and I want to just explain a little bit about my approach to a topic like this. You know, I came in the last couple of minutes of the business portion of the meeting, and I heard the conversations about travel and, you know, the recommendations about bringing proof of vaccinations and double masks and all of this stuff. And you know, everybody knows that we have hit a hard reset button, and it is up for constant discussion and pontification about what it's going to look like afterwards. So there's so many elements that entails, including, of course, economic and political and physical, environmental. And what I want to focus on is social culture and community formation. And obviously, with my my chosen profession and my skill sets and education, I'm best positioned to speak about how that looks in a Jewish spiritual setting. But as I went back over my my comments and just considered what it would sound like to those of you who are not members of synagogues or the Jewish community at all, I looked at it from your point of view and tried to decide, will this be as relevant to you? And I think it will be. I think that it holds true for certainly other communities of faith, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, and probably even for the senior men's group. So let's listen to what I have to say, listening through your own specific lens. And then as I understand the plan, there'll be some space for conversation at the end of my time. So before I launch into my presentation, any questions about me or anything that I've said thus far? Okay, great. So in that case, I'm going to start with describing to you some things that you're already very well aware of, but hearing them from my mouth will assure you that they're the same for us, and it'll also set the stage for where we're headed next together. So with the introduction of a global pandemic into our world, we experienced a huge shock. Everything that we took for granted required new ways to reinvent itself, to explore and to find new ways of delivery. I was just talking with someone yesterday about an organization that he was very deeply involved in, and he described it as a casualty of COVID. There are going to be a great number of organizations that have managed to hang on through COVID, but will not survive the reemergence into normalcy, whatever that looks like. The economic frailty of many organizations was also exposed. We in the Jewish world have been operating on a model, an economic model in synagogues that's pretty old at this point, and came from an era that no longer exists. I'll say a little bit more about that later. But frailty and vulnerabilities were exposed thanks to the pandemic and what took place. That said, and again, no shock to any of you, this has not been all bad. I'm going to share little slides along the way as we go. So this first one is an example of one of the ways that Temple Sinai has moved its religious school into a virtual format. And this is taken from around Hanukkah. So many of you might recognize the song that Cantor Micah in the upper left is singing. And this is just one screen. You can see over on the edge there, it says 1 of 3. So here's a little example. You know what? I forgot I need to click that I'm going to share my my video with you. Hold on half a moment. Forgive me. There we go. Let's try that again. So I could show you an awful lot of examples like that. We're celebrating our Sabbath services, our Friday night Shabbat services every week, and without hard analytics, I'll suggest that we're seeing roughly 50% greater attendance consistently than pre-pandemic. What I want to show you next is a slide that, oops, there we go, that's taken from our streaming service. This is a summary of our analytics from the last year. I started March 1st, and what it suggests is that we've got, and this is a little bit skewed, but we've got 2,500 viewer examples in the continental states. We've got viewers from Australia and Europe, and even someone down here in South America. We've got 2,500 unique views, which is not the same as 2,500 individual people, but it's pretty impressive as I start to think about, what it looks like when you shift your program to a fully virtual format. And now I can't figure out how to stop my screen share. Give me a second to Huh. Hold on half a moment. Oh, there it is. I figured it out now. That's funny. So when we think about the ability to leverage our, forgive the crass language, our product, which is access to community, that's our product. Being able to leverage that virtually becomes really significant. We first installed our live streaming equipment in our sanctuary, gosh, I don't know, Stu, what was it, 3 years ago or so? Rough guess.
Yes.
And we started using it with our high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and we immediately saw that we were reaching people who, for a variety of reasons, were not able to come to the physical building. Primarily, these were people who were homebound or hospitalized. And to some extent, we've got membership that lives outside our area. We've got people who live in, a number of families in Michigan, several snowbelters in Florida. We got people in the Midwest. We got anyway, point being, that gave people access in ways that, was really quite beautiful. And what we were hearing was, thank you so much. I would not have been able to be there without this. So we were well positioned when it was time to go virtual for COVID to bring everyone else into that space to join those who were already using our streaming services. In addition to that, forget about the people who are no longer driving after dark. We had a whole bunch of families who I can see on our little window on Friday nights are sitting around their dinner table with their elementary aged kids, and they never were coming to services in the building because, after a long, hard week, you remember how it feels. You don't want to drag the tired kids back out into, a snowy evening off to whatever event you have, services in our case. And so what we were finding was that we were also collecting an awful lot of families who otherwise would never come to services. One more group who's been positively impacted by this are the socially intimidated folks, those who find moving through a room full of people to be paralyzingly difficult, and who are not so inclined to come into a building. But in a situation like this, it's much safer. Number one, you can turn off your camera. There's safety there. Number two, and I totally feel this, the names, the ability to just look right at a box and say, oh yes, I remember him, or we remember a face but not a name. Zoom helps with that. Here's another advantage that I want to make sure that I say, that is that there's been an increase in a sense of appreciation for our institutions. Part of what houses of worship are struggling with increasingly, and we will come back to this, is demonstrating a value proposition. They're very expensive. And we have to prove to our customers, again, I'm very intentionally using crass language because to some extent as a CEO, in addition to a chief spiritual officer, I've got to make sure that this operation, though we're nonprofit, remains solvent. And so we've got customers who we have to keep happy and a product that has to be top of the line. Again, these are just ways that keep us open so that we can do the important work of the spiritual growth of individuals. But as our value proposition decreases for a lot of aging millennials, it becomes more and more difficult for us to demonstrate why you should remain a member of a synagogue. This might be a quick moment for me to help those who are not in the Jewish community understand that because our Sabbath traditions specifically don't involve money, we don't have the ability of passing a collection plate at services. So over the last, at least 75 years, we've developed a system in which membership, very much like a country club, is established. So you join the synagogue once for the year, you make a nice big contribution, and then that becomes your free will offering, a tithe of sorts. But we don't have the collection at services. So that in some ways that also gives us an advantage in a virtual format. So we've seen a lot of gratitude expressed mostly back to me because I'm the face of the organization, but to all my staff, to the president, just a lot of real renewed understanding of how important our community has been during these last, gosh, almost 12 months now. We've also, paradoxically, and I know a lot of organizations are seeing this, we've seen philanthropy go significantly up this year. It's remarkable. I think that that's a factor of a number of the things that I already described: increased gratitude, increased awareness, but also just an awareness that these are times when not-for-profit organizations desperately need support, and people are coming forward almost before we ask. And when we do ask, the answer has been yes, yes, yes. And so I have to just acknowledge that that's an important piece as well. Here's a statement by a Jewish thinker out there. She's one of the associate vice presidents of the Jewish Federations, which binds the Jewish community across the board. And she said, as organizations, we've engaged in new compromises, we've leaned into our vulnerabilities, and we've given up power in the name of greater partnership. We've become more comfortable with risk, letting go of assumptions that worked only before COVID. And I liked reading that. I felt like that is something that I'm really proud, in whatever humility I'm able to summon, to say that my team at Sinai has done very well. I think we have been, we would be considered amongst those who are doing as well as possible. And I'm really proud of that. So we're going to have to, and now I'm going to move us forward. We're going to have to deal with where we're headed. And there were, Franco was asking the question just beforehand, what about that middle run? Where are we headed immediately out of this? And of course, there's no clean line. Vaccinations have begun. Some of you have already gotten your second vaccination, but this window of time is going to be enormous. We're hearing everything from 6 months to a year before we're all vaccinated. And even then, like I heard someone else say, we don't know what that even means. Is it another vaccination again next year? So we've got all these unknowns. So what I want to share with you is a set of scenarios that was crafted by a think tank in the Jewish world, a huge coalition of leaders of various kinds of organizations that came underneath the Jewish Funders Network. And what they did was they came up with 4 likely scenarios. And this was done only about 3 months ago. So, they'd seen a lot of where we are. This is relatively timely. So scenario 1 is that the economy has recovered and improved, and society has higher cohesion and less inequality. The world is experiencing a new version of the Roaring 20s, and we call this scenario a new renaissance. Now that's rosy. I'd love that one. I think everyone can agree that's the one that we'd want to see emerge. Here's another one. The economy has bounced back, but the recovery has accentuated existing inequalities and created even more fragmentation and social tension. This is a world of gated communities for the rich and civil unrest for the poor. And they called this haves and have-nots. That's a scary one. That's unstable. Here's number 3. The economy doesn't recover. We're in a long depression. I was just reading this the other day that one of the economists out there is forecasting a 30-year recovery. And simultaneously, society is fragmented, even violent. Inequality rises. The economic crisis fuels extremist movements. And society approaches the breaking point. We call this scenario back to the 30s. Now, this was done before we watched the events of January 6th and the violence that emerged there. And here's number 4. In the last scenario, Sorry, I've got my daughter grabbing her Chromebook and my dog trying to grab my attention. So I'm just inviting them out of the space. So here's number 4. In the last scenario, the economy doesn't recover, but the smaller pie is distributed more equitably. The society has learned to exercise solidarity, and a new spirit of cohesion has emerged from the pandemic. We are poorer, but we seem to be happier. We call this scenario a smaller but tastier pie. So obviously, here we go. Obviously, what those Jewish leaders were trying to accomplish is something that everyone would like to have access to, which is, you know, the actual version of America in which we find ourselves in the next year or so. The debt that the country is incurring with the recovery packages is going to make it very difficult to realize version number 1. And all the other 3 are filled with scary elements. The reason that this think tank underwent the exercise was so that their organizations could be thinking about all the possible outcomes. And I've taken their output, and I've tried to think about, well, you know, where would that put, you know, a medium-sized suburban congregation like Temple Sinai? By the way, we count about 360 member units, which makes us among the smallest of the congregations in Stamford, but about mid-size when you look at the, you know, the average Jewish congregation across the country. That's considered a medium-sized place. So, you know, I want to make sure that that we're trying to think about who we are and where we're going and be there before the people need it. So let me talk for a few minutes about what that looks like. So as people are getting ready to come back, in this mid-range time, we've got a great deal of uncertainty. And here's where I think we're going to experience some real tension and conflict. And you have already seen this. Someone was just telling me yesterday, she had been out for a walk with a friend outdoors. And beforehand, she said, "Have you been careful?" And the friend said, "Oh, yes, I have." So they're walking down a path together, and they're both senior citizens. And the friend of mine says to the other, or they're talking, and the other friend says to my friend something about this dinner party that they'd had with just 4 couples. And my friend freaked out, thinking to herself, "You call that careful?" So it's a good example of how everybody else around you is wrong. Every one of us, it has drawn a line for ourselves about what is proper behaviors. Everyone who's being more restrictive is a little cuckoo, come on. And everybody who's being more permissive and less careful is a little irresponsible, right? That's going to play out in some significant ways. And I've been feeling it for the last, gosh, more than 6 months as a decision maker at the synagogue. I've got congregants reaching out to me, not so much right now, but overall, some congregants reaching out so angry that my cantor, my spiritual partner, and I are both standing on the dais at the synagogue. We call it a bima. Yes, we're 15 feet apart, but come on, that's so irresponsible, Rabbi. How can you do that? And other people who are reaching out saying, "Rabbi, why have you not reopened our religious school? The public schools have figured out a way to do it safely. Why can't you? My kids are driving me crazy. I need my Sunday mornings free." So no matter what line I choose, it's going to be wrong. And that's going to be a real challenge as we return to that normalcy that Franco was imagining. There is going to be no right timeline. What I am clear on is that as we begin to reopen, and again, no surprise here, there's going to be a trajectory. You know, it'll be a gradual. At first, once Mayor Martin reopens the phases for Stanford, my task force will begin to reopen our events to public attendance. And it'll be small. We'll put a cap on the size and people will opt in. Some will have gotten their vaccinations and that will make them feel ready. And others will have gotten their vaccinations and feel not at all ready. So during that interim period, there'll be the ease of opting in. And we will maintain for certain a hybrid model. That's not going anywhere. Just like before the pandemic, we had a hybrid model in place. We had most people in person and some who were watching virtually. Now it's going to flip. And the ones who are watching virtually are not going to be just homebound or those who are infirm. It's going to be those who either don't feel safe coming back to the building, plus those who've found advantages in the virtual model. So when we move past that phase is when it starts to get really tricky. It's going, maybe some of you here have already found yourself in this position. I've only had it a handful of times if you leave bar mitzvahs off the table. But when I'm with a group, whether it's leading a worship service or teaching a class or doing a healing service, to have people in front of me in the room, and we've had a few of these environments, and to have another group of people on screen is incredibly difficult. Our public school teachers are doing their best, but it is failing miserably, and it will continue to fail because there's a disconnect. Right now, I can focus on you very carefully. But if I had half of you sitting in the room with me, I would have to decide, who am I speaking to? And it's very hard for one educator to shift his attention back and forth between the two. So there are some ways I can fix this a little bit. I've been putting together a mobile teleconference cart at the synagogue. So when I've got a class, I'm speaking out a year from now, I've got a class in the room with me, and I've got still 8 people who are not there for all the reasons I've already gone over twice. The mobile cart is going to hopefully allow for some better interaction between not just me and the people at home, but also the people at home and the people in the room. It's going to be difficult. We also in our sanctuary set up with a big screen that can drop down from the ceiling and a fixed projector. And I've been trying to figure out too ways that we can do the same thing so that people in the sanctuary can interact or at least see the people who are at home and vice versa. It's very complicated, but we're working out the details there. People used to call me the hugging rabbi. I'd meet someone and I'd say, okay, this is the last time that we're gonna kind of come into contact with each other without my hugging you, if that's okay. I see people and I hug them. Where do we go with that? Handshakes, for God's sake. Are we gonna have to just ask everyone from now on, do you shake? Can we shake? Or is it gonna be a permanent elbow bump? It'll be an interesting thing. I don't know if I'm talking about a year from now or if I'm also talking about 10 years from now. We're going to have to also be thinking about the ritual of transition for individuals. I have watched some real suffering, and I know you have too. The most obvious kind are the losses that have just peppered everybody I know. I don't think there's a person I know who doesn't have at least a second order connection to a death from COVID. And as many people as I do who have been prevented from being at a loved one's side during those last days and hours. The frustration that has been boiling in people around what they see from leadership and the politics of all of this. There's going to have to be a very specific ritualized opportunity for individuals and communities to bring people back. There's going to have, for us, I would probably say a number of things, but one of them is going to be Shehechianu. It's a blessing that says, thank you, God. You gave every single one of us life. You kept us alive, and you enabled as human animals, us the ability to take moments and make them significant. So when people come back to the building for the first time, we're gonna have to ritualize that. When we as a congregation have our first communal event, we're gonna have to ritualize that. We're gonna have to find a way for individuals to be able to tell their stories. Because, I mean, it's really, I don't know if it's the only way, but it's certainly the best way. Every therapist out there will tell us that being able to recount one's story is a really important way of packaging that part of our lives. Every one of you has been through an ordeal this last year. You're gonna need to tell that story to someone who really wants to hear it. You know, as a Jewish community, we certainly understand the importance of our Holocaust survivors telling their stories. You know, not just because of that familiarity, but just because of modern psychology, we know that, that the trauma that has been experienced as a community is trauma made up of individuals. And so we have stories to tell. We're gonna have to find ways to do a lot of that. So now what I'd like to do, having thought through some of the challenges that face us, I want to use what I think is the remainder of my time in speaking to look ahead at where this positions us. Because in addition to the challenges, there are some pretty cool opportunities that are worth mentioning. So I'll start with just a quick quote. This is from Stephen Windmuller, who is a professor at the seminary that I went to that pumps out Reform Jewish rabbis and cantors and educators. And he said, who we were will not be who we are about to become. Now, for some leaders, that's scary. Here, you know what? I'm going to show you a headline from an online news source called Deadline. I think it has to do with what you call it, entertainment news. And this company, Jumamsin, is, I guess, an owner of many of the big Broadway houses. And there's just this news story recently that, you know, you can see this only a couple days ago, January 29th, they have struck a deal. They're dropping Ticketmaster, you know, the behemoth of ticket sales. They're done with Ticketmaster and they're moving their whole sales for all of their theaters over to SeatGeek. Do you know why? Well, let me tell you, it doesn't matter why. They're doing it because they can, because they have an opportunity. Ticketmaster has been a fait accompli until now, with all of the baggage and burden that suggests. Mid-cycle, up until March, they could never have easily contemplated dropping Ticketmaster and moving over to some other platform. And the new platform is going to offer them all kinds of opportunities. But the point that I'm making is that this window in which we took a significant step back from everything we took for granted provides us with a once in a lifetime opportunity. And if we miss it, shame on us. So one of the things that I described before was, now I'm going to go through some of the things that we're doing right now to try to put us in position to deal with any one of those four scenarios that I started with. So at Sinai, we've started a task force to re-examine the way that we relate to our members financially. That country club model that I described to you, it's still working, but you can tell that its expiration date is right around the corner. And so we're using some truths that are out there. I'll summarize them for you here sort of quickly. This is material that came out of the Pew Research study from 2014. No surprises here. This is not Jewish specific, but they did research, longitudinal research, and found that there are some changes happening in America. 35% of millennials describe themselves as nuns, meaning they have, well, here, Religious nuns are shorthand for people who self-identify as atheists or agnostics, as well as those who say that their religion is nothing in particular. And they now make up roughly 23% of the entire US adult population. That's an increase from 2007, when it would have been 16%. So we're only talking in, when this was done, about a change of 7 or 8 years. And we went from 16% of America who had not found a big use for religious institutions, rising to 23%. At the same time, even the older generations have grown somewhat more unaffiliated in recent years. 14% of baby boomers were unaffiliated in 2007, and it now has gone up to 17%. There were a lot more findings that I won't bother with for today. The point being, the religious institutions like synagogues and churches, and I don't know if it applies the same to mosques, but especially in liberal expressions of it, Americans are finding them unsatisfying. I guess I'll optimistically say that. So if they're unsatisfying, it used to be for our baby boomers who were raised with a stronger sense of duty to the collective, that even if they had no great use for the religion themselves, they recognized that there was a duty to stay affiliated. They would maintain their membership even after their kids had become bar mitzvah, because their parents had, and it's what you do. And that was our reliable base. As that base ages out and we can't rely on it anymore, we won't see the children and grandchildren of baby boomers behaving similarly. And so we have to make sure that we're offering a relationship that speaks to their needs. And what does a synagogue offer? I said it before, our product is sacred community. And so everything that I'm focusing on now, these last 2 years, and I have an 18-year vision for the congregation, 18 being a typological number for the Jewish community. I have an 18-year vision that imagines us offering community in ways that today's millennials can articulate that they're looking for. Millennials do have loyalty. The studies are showing that they will stay loyal to something that yields value back to them and that they think values them. And so if a congregation just says, here's the price for membership, we need you to register your kid for religious school, and we'll see you next year when it's time to write that check again, they're not going to find that meaningful. And so we're exploring reframing our financial relationship to members so that it's not a dues model. It's a free will offering model. And we don't think of them as members, we think of them as stakeholders and partners, and we share information differently, and we involve them in decisions differently, and we engage them in ownership differently. In addition to the financial piece, one of the other ways that we've begun doing this, we started this about 1.5 years ago, is a transition into a structure that's based around what I've termed Sinai circles. And I encourage people to imagine the synagogue as a Venn diagram, and every person could readily tell you what circles they're a part of. Right now, we've got 17 circles that are running. They range in size from 4 to, gosh, I don't know how many. Are there any of my Musar people here? That's the biggest. That's got about, I don't know, 40 or so people in it. Mostly they're meant to be small, much smaller than that. But places where individuals can see their value, feel their value, offer their value, and take ownership. And I've already watched in our second round of circles, an awful lot of people who had a good experience the first time decide that they want to lead a circle the next time. And some of our leaders from the first time have become coordinators this second time. And I've already got current members who are excited to lead their own circle next time. It's beginning to change so that individuals see that the synagogue is theirs. It's not a professionalized Judaism that they hand over to the rabbi to run for them. Increasingly, it's owned by them. And I'm just the glue that holds all these circles overlapping together. we're thinking about education. You know, as much as I wish I could say that I have already changed the way Jewish education is delivered, it still looks probably pretty similar to the way that my parents received their Jewish education. And we're trying, and there are some great thinkers out there whose lead we're following. We're trying to really change the goals, stated and implicit, of what Jewish education is, rather than trying to cram into a bored child too much information in too little time. We're trying to help blossom and lead a Jewish young soul to feeling a profound pride over their Jewish identity. They can get the information they need anywhere now. You know, my 7-year-old can readily find any detail she needs about Jewish knowledge. The internet has done that for us. So they don't need us to do the same kind of education we used to. So we're trying to stay ahead of what they actually need. And that is, we need to raise up proud, strong identified Jews. And that will help us, this tiny little peoplehood, to stay vibrant for another generation. I'm going to conclude with one suggestion that I've mentioned publicly before, and it's a little dramatic, but that's the purpose of my saying this. Judaism has been a meandering and often forced to wander tradition, which, because of its built-in adaptability, has evolved enormously over time. Nothing in the Jewish world today looks anything like it did 1,000 years ago. You almost couldn't recognize elements of Judaism today if you were to drop in that long ago. You drop back another 1,000 years, and now you're right around the turn of the first millennium. And that's what I call Judaism 1.0. That was a Judaism that was based on ritual cultic worship, centralized in Jerusalem around a system of priestly interplay between humanity and God, animal sacrifice, highly centralized structure. And with the Roman destruction of the city in the year 70, that decentralization was forced upon us. And incredibly, the leadership, the rabbinic leadership of the day, adapted and presented a whole new Judaism. And we've been in that, what's known as rabbinic Judaism, ever since, almost 2,000 years. I've been calling it Judaism 2.0. And we've gone through 2.1 and 2.2. I think we're up to about 2.197, but actually that's not the way the numbering works. I get it, I know. My point is, I think we might be ready for Judaism 3.0, in which we dramatically change the way that institutions think of themselves and that Jews look at the way their institutions serve them. I think this is true as I speak to my dear friends who are leading non-Jewish organizations. I think it's true in many of those as well. And I think it's, you know, it's something that a lot of organizations, maybe even your own, will be looking at as well. What is our value proposition these days? And is our mode for delivering it from before still the right way to deliver it moving forward? So I almost feel like I want you to say amen. I feel like I just, exhausted myself giving a sermon, but I would love to see if there's observation or comment or clarification question to get us rolling.
Okay. Franco.
Oh, Franco, you're still muted. Can you unmute yourself and say that again?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Rabbi, for this, I would say, very elegant way of putting this transitional period. And I was puzzled by the fact that you refer to the Renaissance. And the 4 points on your slides, I lean towards Renaissance. And being from Florence, I can say you, the Renaissance came from 2 factors. One, richness, desire for people who survived to live, to be creative, to therefore to rebound from the death of the black plague. Yeah, in the 1300. That also was favorized by an important element. Basically, a transfer of technology and information, knowledge, especially from the old Greek philosophy that came from the Roman West Empire and the Islam. They have translated all these things. In 1335, Medici convened a concilium, and there was a flood of knowledge and information that came available to everybody. We discovered the beauty of thinking, the beauty of the philosophy, and the beauty of the common ground of humanity. I think this pandemic will bring again that inner circle around us to know better ourselves, to know better our neighbors, and therefore with our neighbors to enjoy the travel of a life in this earth. And I think it will be a great rebound beside all other things. But I think man has learned a lesson, and I hope that will endure the time and will bring a better humanity. Thank you for bringing all these thoughts available to us.
That's beautiful, Franco. I think that the impediment to that vision is the divisiveness that is being sown and is so deeply embedded in our society right now. And if we cannot bring ourselves together, then we won't be able to achieve that kind of renaissance. There'll be too much anger to allow for the flow of that beauty. And so I walk this constant line of trying to decide how much divisive material to bring into the synagogue. And every religious leader is wrestling with this. There are some issues that I consider to be moral issues that our Torah speaks to. But if I bring them into the synagogue, I divide people. So is it better that our synagogues are places where the rabbi gets to speak what sound like his politics from the pulpit? Or is it better that we turn our attention to something that can bring us together so we can achieve that renaissance? I love what you said, Franco. Thank you.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands up. Oh, Lloyd. You're mute, Lloyd.
Lloyd, if you're speaking, we need you to unmute.
So,
there you go.
Anyway, in our current culture, as seems to be, is that only the elites are having the renaissance of thought and emancipation, and where the rest of the people, because of disinventiveness from the government, are now saying, I don't need this. I don't need to have this. Let someone else figure out what to do, and I'll join in. And therefore, I'm not really a participant in this potential renaissance. And I believe that that's the direction of which our country is going. And it seems to be, because every time you read or listen, is that you have the so-called peaceful protests that destroys property, injures people in the West Coast, particularly, and they are the favorite protesters. So therefore, there's no punishment, no consequence for what they do, other than their immediate problems that they have, like no stores, because they've all been looted. Then you have the disfavored group who get full punishment of existing law. And that group is the disfavored group, and they get fully punished. And therefore, the January 6th riot at the Capitol, they will be fully punished. They will go to prison, and the normal society will take care of them. But the favorite group is allowed to do as they wish, when they wish, and and therefore they're not really part of any evolutionary society like we're having.
So Lloyd, I couldn't agree with some of what you said more. I think you're right on that, that it is the elites who are enjoying the benefits of the beginning of Renaissance. I think the problem that we face is that we can't agree on who the elites are. The reality, step away from the ultra rich. You know, I look around this group and there are ways in which I would propose that what I see in front of me constitutes an enormous sector of the elite. I bet a lot of us would say, wait, I'm not the elite. And we would look at others and say favored groups, which is an element of a way of saying there's an elite status there. They can behave in a way that you see they're not punished for. And the anger that we're all experiencing is because we're looking at others and saying, they're the elite. I'm not the elite. And we're going to have to reconcile with that because otherwise, you're right, we're going to be trapped into a cycle of anger about how the other is behaving, regardless of where we position ourselves. Thanks, Lloyd. I really appreciate you saying what you did.
Joe?
Yes, Rabbi, very interesting presentation. Certainly our lives are going to be changed. No question about that. I've never shopped online except occasionally, and I find myself, it's easier to click a button than to get in the car and go to a store and go to Home Depot or wherever else. And that probably will continue in the future, but in the Catholic Church, for example, one of our requirements is that we go to Mass every Sunday. And with the pandemic, that requirement has been waived. We can attend virtually, and if we can't do that, you know, it's been waived. Will, let's say, religious institutions that require attendance, if they mandate now when the pandemic is over that you go and people feel uncomfortable putting themselves in that situation, will they suffer the consequences of people just dropping religion altogether? That's my first question.
That's a great, you want to ask the second one or should I respond to that one?
No, go to the other one is unrelated.
So, so on the one hand, I'm not the best authority to answer because I specifically put myself into a movement of Judaism that doesn't relate to mandated behaviors. I can't mandate anything for anybody. That's one of the tenets of my form of Judaism. If I were an Orthodox rabbi, I might have a little bit better insight into how that works, but I can say that the relationship to mandated behavior has been an issue that the Catholic Church has been facing for a couple decades now, and really wrestling with how do we get a new generation who doesn't overwhelmingly relate to that kind of expression of Catholicism. How do we get them back in the doors? And they've done a pretty good job. I mean, it's a titanic task, and turning the Titanic has been a slow process, but through some very good leadership, the Catholic Church is really wrestling with that. In some ways, I think that it forces the question further for young people to say, wait a second, if it was important before the pandemic, but not during the pandemic, why does it have to be important after the pandemic? And so I do think, Joe, that that's going to be a challenge. I think if the leadership can ask and answer the question effectively, what do young Catholics really want for themselves and their children, then the Catholic Church stands to really soar out of this.
Thank you. The other question is based on your 4 scenarios. It seems that you might, government intervention might be necessary. However, do you see government intervention and legislation being effective to create a fifth scenario, let's say, that would work? I mean, based on what we've seen with the government, I have my doubts, but what are your thoughts on it? Because evidently, these four scenarios were well thought out of.
Yeah. Well, somebody,
yes,
if you're not speaking, go ahead and mute yourself just so we don't get the feedback. I think scenario one, for example, I think it's gonna assume some significant government involvement, because the anger that I was speaking about with Lloyd a few minutes ago, we've got big sections of our country who have missed out on their piece of the pie, and that description bridges the gap between race and religion and age. We've got a lot of disappointed people, and there times in history where a lot of disappointed people became the predominant situation. They grew unstable very rapidly, and sometimes beauty emerged from that. But if we're going to avoid that real dangerous instability, I think it does require some government engagement. I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone here that the way I'm speaking, I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal. I believe that part of government's opportunity is to bring everyone along together. And so, I think that if we're going to enjoy the benefits of some of those strategies, it's not going to be possible for one piece of the whole puzzle to do it. It's going to require us houses of worship along with the social networks that are out there, including government.
Thank you.
Rabbi?
But sorry, one last thought. Joe, you said you have your doubts. I do too. Whether or not the government can do it, that's a totally different conversation.
Right.
There, I have my serious doubts.
Rabbi, I'm Franco. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Franco.
Yes, thank you for allowing me this second question. It's more a philosophical question. We are now in the middle of a storm. We cannot see the end of the storm. But if you go yourself mentally, psychologically, put yourself as a 20, 30 years from now and look at this period from an historical perspective, you'll see that during this period, we'll have this trouble. But the course of the wind, the course of humanity goes towards a recognition of the understanding that more and more we understand what's happening around the house, more we realize that we are part of the same boat, in the same ecological boat, environmental boat, social boat, and the mutiny on the boat has to stop, because if it doesn't stop, the boat sinks. Therefore, I hope through this pandemic we learn a lesson that our traveling in time, space, and in mind is common. And therefore, the master, that the government, the people, the invisible, that have to realize that the common goal has to be achieved to stewardship of this land, this heart, of this beautiful place, and any contribution, our group, our talking every day should always say, do I say good morning to other person? Do I understand what the other person does? And therefore, probably we can build a better world. So any contribution you ask, everybody does to that goal will help us probably reaching a turning point where the individualism and the greatness of the immediate return will be exchanged for a better for everybody. So I really would like to thank you for this, bringing us this thought.
Thank you, Franco. That's beautiful.
Lloyd, did you want to say something?
Well, yes, I could. I was going to ask the rabbi whether or not does he feel in the next foreseeable future that religious freedom, as we supposedly have in our Constitution, being altered or even abridged by a government authority under any pretext. You know, this COVID-19, and next year could be something else, where in the past that has never been done. Even when we had the SARS epidemic potential in this country, which we escaped, fortunately, back in 1993, there was never a thought of curtailing religious practice. But yet here we see it in the COVID-19, instantly religious services was immediately curtailed or even stopped, and therefore abridged the so-called the written Constitutional Amendment 1. You think that this is going to be a continuing practice by government to overrule supposedly the written Constitution under any pretext that they come up with?
Oh, Lloyd, I think you and I could be good friends. So, you know, we have the right to free speech in this country, but you can't go into a theater and yell fire. You can't incite the, you know what, I'll just leave it at that. One of the beautiful things about our country, the freedoms that we treasure so much, include, in a way, live and let live. And so how do you balance that approach when somebody else's behavior is going to endanger everyone else? If COVID-19 was such that you could have a group of people, and if they want to go worship and infect each other, and it would stay right there, okay, that's one approach. But when it affects all the rest of us, then it's not about freedom of religion. It's about whether you get to drive 100 miles an hour down High Ridge Road. There's a limitation on each other's behavior for the betterment of the whole. And so, you know, we saw these Orthodox Jewish funerals just a couple weeks ago, in fact, not even a week ago. Thousands and thousands of people showing up to these funerals, packed like sardines. And it's not just about the danger to themselves. So, you know, for New York City to step in and say, that is not acceptable. You're not playing by the social contract. I think, yeah, that's an appropriate place for the government to say, we're going to have to agree to some limitations here. You know, I could give you tons more scenarios in which the ridiculousness of religious freedom could be extended to a point where we wouldn't have an argument. But I think, you know, if you use those extremes to demonstrate the principle, it's still the point made. So, I mean, I would hope that we would find ourselves in a place where there wouldn't need to be the government engaging in religious practice. But at the moment, yes, I'm comfortable with the government having a say on whether or not everything is free, a free-for-all.
Okay, I think that's exhaustive questions, Rabbi. Thank you so much for being part of our meeting and kind of presenting some interesting ideas and things to think about. So I think it was great that you were here. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you soon.
It was a pleasure, gentlemen. I look forward to individual conversations offline with anyone, and yes, I look forward to seeing many of you soon, and even in person someday.
Okay, thanks. Back to you, Joe.
I thank you, Stu, and just echoing what Stu said, Rabbi, thank you for joining us today and giving an insight on what we can expect or hope to expect in the future and what our lives will be. Certainly, like you said, I think, you know, there's going to be change, and let's hope it's all for the better and using what we've learned to our own betterment. And as always, gentlemen, if there's no further questions, I'd like to end the meeting with, let's pray that we all stay healthy, be careful, and enjoy the rest of the snowstorms that are coming up for the next few days. It's nice that we don't have to cancel a meeting. That's one benefit that we have, that we don't have to cancel our meetings anymore. Again, meeting is ended. Thank you for all for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So long, guys.
I'm gonna go get some lunch. They want us to go on my Zoom.